So I got this nice report from IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, which is under the CGIAR, which is the consultative group for CGI International Agricultural Research Institute, or some such thing. You can look it up. But it's basically about rethinking food crisis responses. When you say there is a crisis, you have to have probably some definition which we will look at, and this belongs in adaptation basically because this points to resilience against food crisis overall. So it's very important because hunger is a problem that persists in many places, including some rich countries, surprisingly. So the report is long. I'm obviously again going to make just a few podcasts out of it. These are the chapters: Road to Resilience, Rethinking Responses to Food Crisis, Food Crisis Risk Monitoring, Early Warning for Early Action. So these are definitely adaptation tools. Crisis Resilience, again important. Humanitarian response and anticipatory action, so that if there's an El Nino coming, if there are droughts coming or persisting, then how to do responses based on anticipatory actions. Agri-food value chains, building resilient food systems, social protection, adaptive safety nets for crisis recovery. We have talked about this a lot in adaptation in terms of economic policies and macro fiscal policies for integrating adaptation into the whole budget process. Gender, promoting equality in fragile and conflict affected settings. We did talk about women and children in adaptation. Climate change is not gender neutral. Of course it crosses international boundaries but affects women much more than men. Forced migration, which is a critical topic, fragility, resilience and policy responses. Okay, we'll briefly read the key findings in each chapter, and I'll just pick one or two figures when I think they add value in addition to the key findings that we're going to read off. Starting with chapter 1, The Road to Resilience, Rethinking Responses to Food Crisis. This is the authors and their titles. I won't read those. Key messages, I will read a lot of text again, remembering that in a social science course like adaptation, we will have a lot of text, and in a classroom you would do it slightly differently, but on a YouTube channel it's easier to just read them after giving you the reference to the report, which you can read yourself as well. But I add my commentary as well. So key messages: calls to rethink responses to food crisis have arisen from recent overlapping shocks to food systems, including the COVID-19 pandemic, increased food prices, conflicts and natural disasters, and from concerns that crises are becoming more frequent, complex and protracted. These are often called compound events in the climate community, and we will not use that terminology here. Now is an opportune moment to develop more permanent responses to food crises, guided by strong evidence on the impact of policies, programming, tools and governance approaches. Drawing on research from IFPRI and colleagues, this report provides a broad set of evidence-based recommendations for better predicting and preparing for crises, addressing crises when they occur, and building equity and the resilience of food systems. All incredibly good goals in any case. Early warning systems can facilitate preemptive, rapid and context-appropriate responses, provided they are well coordinated and based on frequent monitoring of key indicators and understanding of how structural risks can aggravate shocks to food security. So everything is functioning in a structural system, a system with structures on food acquisition. The terminology is acquisition. So the governments collect grains and so on from farmers with some baseline prices or market prices and so on. And then there are distribution centers. They are also storage centers to hedge against things like El Nino or predicted droughts and so on and so forth. So the last mile problems always come down to having well coordinated efforts that have key indicators to monitor food security and storage um, for dealing with crises and understanding structural risks, which can actually provide shocks to the food security if you're not careful about how you manage them, or you have methodologies in place to handle shocks. Anticipatory action frameworks, which help prepare and organize humanitarian aid before crises strike, show promise both for mitigating crises and supporting long-term development efforts. This is critical. So, as we have said, adaptation and economic development goals can be very synergistic or often common, because resilience brings more investments, for example. So in the context of food, again, anticipatory action frameworks should include those long-term development efforts as synergistic goals as well. Agri-food value chains can support livelihoods and food security during crises when governments maintain a business environment that fosters flexibility and technical and financial innovation, and provide essential infrastructure and targeted assistance for at-risk value chain actors. So this is about promoting or incentivizing people and firms to build risk-informed decisions so that the value chain remains resilient to shocks and perturbations in the food sector. Social protection systems are essential to reducing the impact of crises. They can build resilience prior to a crisis and facilitate recovery when they are flexible, shock responsive, and carefully targeted. Integrating social protection with gender and climate goals can further empower women and promote sustainability. So multiple points there. You want to be very resilient to crises, but you also want to recover from crisis as quickly as possible back to the original functionality. That's resilience, of course. So you want to build in resilience, and we have already discussed how women play a key role in these, and we will read this again in one of the chapters as we saw in the content. And this, of course, is also critical for overall sustainability, right? Improvements in collecting gender disaggregated data, particularly amid crises, and tracking progress toward clear gender targets can promote gender equality. Likewise, including women's voices in policymaking and programming decisions can help ensure that crisis responses improve rather than erode gender equality. So bringing women into the system, financial system and decision-making systems, politics even, especially US is now realizing more and more that having more women in Congress actually improves the entire decision-making system, the expediency and the compromises needed and so on and so forth, especially with climate impacts not getting enough attention because of all the lobbying and so on and so forth. Forced migrations can create both challenges and opportunities for development. Migrants can provide benefits for both the host and sending communities when policies facilitate their integration into host communities and support those who remain. So migrants, when displaced, always aim to send money back to where they came from, so they can contribute to the economy where they have come in and also help the people from where they came from, where they came. And of course, these are not as simple in the sense, if you are displaced because of food crisis or climate impacts, then you may be going into another place which also has resource limitations or other ethnic and cultural tensions, language barriers, general xenophobia and so on. So integration is not easy, and migrants in general take time to assimilate. Education becomes an issue, and political participation, agency, facilities, sanitation, schools, etc. It's a big problem. The resilience of food systems depends critically on good governance. Governance determines the ability to implement and sustain effective policies and programming to offset negative shocks, curb incentives for violent conflict, and support the functioning of markets and private sector investments. Recent events have highlighted the need for crisis response funding to be expanded and used more efficiently. Repurposing agricultural support funds and better leveraging private sector funds could bolster investments in long-term resilience. Let's look at a few figures. So this is 2021 data projected forward out to 2021 is projected, and the data were up to 2020. So you are looking at prevalence and number of undernourished worldwide population 2000 to 2021. You are looking at percentages. So prevalence of undernourishment and number of people undernourished. So there is slight definition of what is prevalence and what is actual number of people. So you can see obviously prevalence is here in terms of percentage, and this is the number of people on this axis here in millions. Okay, so in terms of percentage of the population, we have gone down in terms of prevalence of undernourishment, but it has picked up more recently, especially maybe because of COVID, but it started maybe just before COVID or with COVID, but COVID definitely exacerbated undernourishment and food security issues. And here are the millions. So you can see there was a jump of 150 million going from 2019 and projected into 2021. Of course, as I'm recording this, I'm in 2023, but this report itself is for 2023, so they don't have the data, more recent data. This is global ending stocks, excluding China. So you're looking of days of use in terms of maize, soybeans, rice, and wheat. So the availability of global ending stocks. So for 2021, you can see maize. We are looking at 2021, 2020. 21-22 and 22-23. So there was a drop in each of them, more so in maize and wheat and rice than in soybeans. Soybean is not a stable crop. It's more of a cash crop with various consumption patterns, oils, direct consumptions, processed products, etc. But rice, wheat, and maize are more directly consumed. So there is a more continuous drop in soybeans and rice as well as wheat. So it's not just it is probably COVID, but we have to be careful about what the other parameters were. For example, if the Russian invasion of Ukraine played a role in wheat and fertilizer impacts on rice and maize and so on. So there are always confounding factors. Trends in extreme weather events, droughts and floods 1900 to 2022. They all show upward trend. So extreme weather events, droughts and floods, but you can see there is a flattening with more interannual variability. So there is a large trend here when the warming trend also occurred, but droughts show more of low frequency variability and year-to-year variabilities as well. And of course, floods have shown a much higher jump in terms of number of events globally, because of increased extreme rainfall events, and there is some evidence that they have also become larger in scale and so on, especially in the monsoon domain, which obviously affect agriculture in many ways. Forcibly displaced people worldwide again has jumped, and projections here show that when this was published, it would go up again, related to a combination of COVID crisis, where that cascaded into migrant laborers losing jobs because of economic slowdowns or quarantines, etc. It happened a lot in India, for example, and so on and so forth. Let's read a few conclusions of this chapter. First years of this decade exposed the many vulnerabilities of our food systems, which employ 2 billion people and sustain and nourish all of the world's 8 billion people. So employment is always a key factor to keep in mind, because GDP contribution can be much lower, but employment can be much higher. Underpaid jobs, of course, or low-paid jobs. Food systems are not only susceptible to increasingly complex and compounding shocks, but are also closely intertwined with other essential systems: climate and environmental services, trade and the economy, infrastructure, governance, healthcare, and social protection. Failures within these systems can cause crises in our food systems, and in turn, weakness in our food systems can drive environmental degradation, conflict, economic disruptions, and poverty and inequity. Using food systems to build a more proactive response to disaster, one that's anticipatory, flexible, and inclusive, can produce multiple co-benefits: benefits for food and nutrition security, poverty, livelihoods, equality, and political stability. So conflicts on this side, political stability on this side. The process of building and improving crisis responses should be rooted in high quality evidence, so robust data, state-of-the-art tools, and policy analysis and scenarios developed by research organizations and networks like IFPRI and CGIAR. Let's say it's not self-promotion and honest intention. This evidence can help policymakers, donors, and the international development community and the private sector to move quickly in times of need. Increasing crises in food, human systems, and the natural world will not abate in the coming years. This is pretty much sure. The time to step up our efforts to develop a more permanent, sustainable response is now. This is a fairly long podcast, so I'll stop here and come back to other chapters in the next podcast, and I'm also beginning to have a dry throat. So see you in the next podcast from chapter 2 onwards. Okay?